Good morning and welcome to Lipton Evangelical Missionary Church, virtual church. And I should introduce myself. I'm the new interim pastor, Pastor Guy Schultz. Live in Regina, but I'm coming up to Lipton on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I'll be here. I'll stay overnight on the Tuesday, so I'll be here for those 2 days. And then as the phases open up here in the province, hopefully we'll be having church in the next few weeks on Sunday mornings. But in the meantime, we're going to do these virtual services. I'm trying to work out some technical glitches, so mostly what you're going to hear is a message or a sermon, maybe a short prayer or two in between. But the more we kind of figure this out, maybe we can run run longer services along the way. Maybe include some music, or maybe a short testimony, or include announcements and those kind of things. So anyway, I'm really excited about being here in Lipton and coming out here and getting to know each of you. So we'll just kind of jump into the message now. Go from there. Good morning. Welcome to Lipton Evangelical Missionary Church. And this morning we've got a hopefully inspirational message for you here. I want to ask you, what's your story? How is Christ involved in your story? And that's what we're going to focus on here. There's two short scriptures I want to read. Matthew 13:34, and it says, Jesus, whenever he spoke to them, he always used parables, and he always used a story. Some versions stay in an illustration or a metaphor or whatever, but every time Jesus spoke and tried to get a truth across, he complemented it with a story. And we find that right at the tail end of the Bible too, in Revelation 12 verse 11, and it talks about how can we overcome the enemy, and that of course is the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the way we overcome the enemy is through redemption, through the blood of Christ, but also through the word of our testimony. And think of it in your own lives. When you've embraced a truth, any kind of truth, but especially a spiritual truth, I can almost guarantee what drove it home was how it worked in someone else's life. There was a story to it, and you could relate to it, and you could bring it into your life. So I want to talk about, the next 2 or 3 times I want to talk about stuff that works. And this is one of those things where telling a story will take spiritual truth, it'll bring root in your life or in someone else's as well. God lives in our stories. He's the incarnational God. He blesses redemptive truth. Some people use the word anointing. I like that word anointing. But whenever you share a redemptive kind of truth to another person, God tends to bless that and honor that in that person's life. So I just want to tell you 2 stories of how I've seen this work in the past. And one of them is when I first moved to Calgary. That's back in the early 90s. And one of the first Sundays I went to church, this really sweet lady came up to me and said, would you counsel my nephew? He just moved here from Saskatchewan. And he's got problems, he's got this, he's got that, he's going through a divorce, he's only 23, 24 years old. And I said, well, I'm willing to do that, but could you introduce me to him first? And she goes, well, I've already kind of set it up for you to meet him at Boston Pizza, just across the road in about a week. I tend not to like those kind of setups, if I can put it that way. They don't usually go that well. And when I got there, this young man, he goes, this is a setup, isn't it? And I said, what do you mean? And he says, you met my aunt, right? Da-da-da-da. And he says, she's a sweet lady, but she's always trying to get religion into me, and I don't want any religion in me. And she said you were a social worker, and I find out you're a preacher. And he was a little bit upset. So I thought, let's just kind of tone the thing down, and we just started talking. And both of us are from small town Saskatchewan. Both of us played probably every sport every young man in Saskatchewan plays: hockey, football, baseball, curling. And we started to connect at that level. I didn't do any social working with him, any preaching at him that time. I just wanted to see if we could set up a friendship. And after about an hour of kind of connecting, he says, I'm going to give this a shot. He says, yeah, I'm going through a tough divorce right now. I need someone I can talk to, someone I can trust. And he says, let's do this for 2 or 3 weeks, see how it works. Hopefully you won't be offended if I say I want to stop or whatever. But he says, don't use any Bible on me. I don't want to hear any Bible verses or Bible quotes or Bible stories. And I thought, well, this will be interesting. So anyway, we started to meet, and it went well. We met probably 3 or 4 weeks out of every month. We met for a full year. And about a year later, he said, where do you get all this good information stuff from? He says, this is stuff in my life that's starting to work. And just as I was about to speak, he goes, you get it from the Bible, don't you? And he said, just tell me, where in the Bible do you find these things? And so I pulled out a napkin, and we started to write out. And we had, like I say, a number of sessions. And I said, well, we talked about conflict resolution, didn't we? And I said, you could find that in Ephesians 4, Romans 12, Matthew chapter 5. We talked about restoring your first love, and have a lot of stories around that. You can find that in Revelation chapter 2, as an example. We talked about the dangers of cheating. And I said I got a lot of material out of the book of Proverbs, especially Proverbs 4, 5, and 6. We talked about justifiable divorce. He was wondering, is it right to get a divorce, not to get a divorce? Was he in the wrong? Was she in the wrong? All those kind of issues. So I said, well, there's the scriptures in Matthew 5, Malachi 2, 1 Corinthians 7 that we referred to. We talked about abuse. We don't want abuse in any kind of relationship. But the book of Malachi, and he looked at me like, what is that? I said, well, that's a book in the Bible, the book of Malachi. And it talks specifically about abuse in relationships. We talked about the joy of sex. I said, there's a whole book in there called the Song of Solomon, 5 chapters. That's almost like the joy of sex in Proverbs chapter 5. And he goes, no way. And I said, yeah. And so I had a Bible in my briefcase. So I showed him. We talked about, this is later on in the counseling, talked about the importance of prayer, but that was probably 8, 9 months into it. And talked about 1 Peter chapter 3, where it says that a husband's prayers can be hindered if they don't treat their wife with consideration and respect. We talked about communication keys, James chapter 1, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We talked about the importance of equality in a relationship. Referred to the book of Ruth, also to the book in Acts chapter 2, about that as well. And at the end of all this, he goes, my goodness, every point we talked about, he said, you based that in some part of the Bible. And I said, yeah, I guess I did. And he says, give me that napkin. And then he said, I got to go get me a Bible. And well, since I was working at a church, that wasn't too hard. The next time we got together, I got him a Bible, and he started reading it in portions. But he started to come to church, not on a weekly basis, but a fairly regular basis. And for the 13, 14 years we had our church plant in Calgary, he came out almost that entire time that we were there. We're still in touch with each other. Actually, I got a little Facebook thing from him just the other day in his isolation, back where he is with his son right now. And that's one of the ways that the word of our testimony can make a difference in someone's life. Another story is I was in a bonspiel. We were doing playdowns in Alberta, and we had won our first couple of games. And the feature writer for the Calgary Herald for curling came down to the rink, and he said, I heard about the preacher and his team, and he said, I want to interview you. And this began a relationship that's still going till today, probably going back about 17, 18 years ago. But as we're sitting down there, he's got his little tape recorder, he's got his notepad, and there's curlers all around, and I'm trying to be discreet and careful and all the rest of it. And he said, tell me how curling and theology can mix. And I thought, this is not where I thought it was going to go with the whole story. And, you know, I remember setting up a real quick prayer and thinking, okay, what can I tell him that's not going to scare him off or the people that are eavesdropping? And it just popped into my mind. I says, you know, I've learned a lot about faith, about sin, and about connection on the curling ice. And he goes, tell me more. So I said, well, I was skipping that team at the time, and I said, I've got 3 guys that we've been curling together for almost a decade. And I said, I don't think they would be with me as a skip this long if they didn't have trust in me. I said, when I put the broom down on the ice for them to aim at it to deliver a rock, I know they're trying to make the shot, whether they make it or not. They're aiming to make that shot. But I said, I've curled with other people where I put the broom down, and I know they don't trust me as a skip, and they're taking their own ice or their own broom, and they're missing on purpose. And I said, the biblical definition for the word sin is to miss the mark on purpose. And I said, I know my teammates, and they started laughing in the background. I said, they don't miss the broom on purpose. They've got faith in me. And I said, that's kind of how we need to be with Christ as well, or with God, in trusting Him. Do we trust in Him? Do we trust in His Word? But the big kicker is, there's often a gap there. Do we seek to put that into practice? And that's the difference. That's when you have true faith, or if you have more of a false faith. And the guy's eyes kind of lit up like this. He says, that makes sense. So we talked about, you know, faith and sin, and I said, the more we trust each other, I've got to trust my players as well. The more we trust each other, we've developed these good relationships. And these are 3 men that I've been friends with now, probably for a quarter of a century. And again, still hear from them on a regular basis. but we developed that trust on the ice. But we played that into the faith aspect as well. And the next day in the Calgary Herald, I got to admit, I was a little bit scared. I thought, was this going to be a little short article, no article, whatever. But he gave me a third of a page, and what he focused on was, I thought he'd focus on the curling. He focused on faith, sin, and connection. I thought, what a nice way, the way he wrote it. And he was accurate in what he wrote, a way to get the gospel across in maybe a low-key way in more of a public place. So that's another way, sharing the word of our testimony or sharing our stories or illustrations or metaphors to illustrate spiritual truth. And as we do that, I really believe the Holy Spirit, I'm sure you've all experienced that as well, when you share those stories of how Christ has made a difference in your life, those things go into people's hearts. So the power of a changed life. One of my favorite ministries is Teen Challenge that David Wilkerson across the Switchblade fame began or started. And that's their motto, the power of a changed life, but it's through hearing stories of how God works. And where they got that from, you're probably familiar with the 12 steps. They also have what's called the 12 traditions. And tradition 11 is our ministry policy is based on attraction, not promotion. And that's what Matthew 13 and Revelation 12 is talking about, with the power of story and our testimonies. So I just want to encourage you to keep telling your stories to one another. We need to hear our stories and encourage each other. But we also need to share our stories just over coffee or over a visit or over lunch or whatever with our friends around the community as well. Not to force those stories, but when situations come up, this is how God has worked in my life. And watch how the Holy Spirit's going to work through your life in encouraging other people as you tell your story of what Christ has done with you. So anyway, God bless you all, and we'll meet with you again next week.